Good afternoon and a warm welcome to today's webinar. It's nice to see so many of you here today. My name's Kit Salt and I'm the Endpoint Assessment Service Manager here at SFJ Awards, and I'll be hosting today's event together with Steve Fealy, who's one of our lead independent assessors and product developers for this standard. Steve and I'll be supported by Zoe Printer from our marketing team, who is stage managing behind the scenes and helping us with all things technological, thank goodness. The focus of today's session is to outline the key changes in the recently updated Endpoint Assessment Plan for Operational Firefighter. And over the past year or so, we've been working with you to ensure that you and your apprentices are fully supported on the journey to and through endpoint assessment. This webinar is one of a number of support sessions we'll be running for version 1.2 as part of our conversations with you and your teams in preparation for delivery. So before we begin, I'm just going to run through some housekeeping so you know how to participate in today's event, because in the old world, we'd be in a room with you, so it would be quite straightforward. So whether we want to be or not, I'm sure we're all now very familiar with how Zoom webinars run, but just in case, here are a couple of quick points for you. At any time during the webinar, you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions to us, and to do so, just type your questions into the Q&A feed. You'll see that at the bottom of the control panel. You can upvote the questions that resonate with you the most, and we'll address as many as we can during the Q&A session at the end of the webinar, but if we don't answer all the questions, we will reply afterwards. We'd like this webinar to be as interactive as possible, so as usual, although your speakers are muted, you'll be able to interact with us, putting any comments in the chat function. So it might be good, if you're willing, to just pop your name, role and current location into the chat so we all know who else is on the webinar. So if you can have a go at doing that now, that would be really good. And I'm looking over, come on. Oh, well done, Drew, for being the first, fantastic. So just pop your name in. Hello, John, hi, Lindsay, Daz, nice to see you all. Brilliant, always takes one person to start it off, so fantastic. So to kick us all off and get us all warmed up and demonstrate the use of another interactive element we're going to use today, we're going to now pop up a quick poll. So if you can just complete this, it'll be really interesting to see what your answers are. I know what mine is already. How's everyone doing today? Just pop up your thoughts. Okay, that's great. Thank you. Okay, so most of you are having a good day, which is fantastic, actually. And I think probably because it stopped raining where I am anyway, and it stopped snowing. So that's a good start for a Tuesday. So having a good day. Brilliant. Okay, thank you. Thanks for taking part in that poll. So we're going to have another go at using the chat function now, just a quick go. So you'll see a number on your screen, 1,566. What do you think that number here represents? Just have a guess, any guess, and just pop your answers in the chat and we'll come back to it later. So what do you think this number is? Well done. I can see some of you having a guess. That's brilliant. Fantastic. Excellent. You're also on it today. That's great. Okay, thanks. Thanks for doing that. And we'll come back to that a bit later. Okay, so before I pass you over to Steve, who's going to be going through the key changes, I wanted to give you an overview of SFJ's delivery of endpoint assessment for operational firefighters so far. So since we started delivery at the end of November 2019, we've run over 480 endpoint assessments across the country for this standard and growing. This is one of 6 standards that we're currently delivering on, and we've got more planned in the future. Most of our delivery, amazingly, has been during the pandemic, but we've worked really closely with you, our customers, and our assessor team to ensure that endpoint assessments have been delivered safely and when scheduled. And luckily, we haven't had to cancel any so far, touch wood somewhere in the room. We believe in working in partnership with our customers to ensure the best EPA experience for apprentices. And for Operational Firefighter, we've been working with you and your delivery teams, and we want to do that as early as we can, providing information sessions and site visits to answer any queries you might have. Our EPA coordinators, as you know, are always on hand to support with the end-to-end process from registration right through to certification. During this year, well, last year actually, since we started, we've been introducing technology to those that want it. So we can now offer the knowledge test online and we can carry out the professional discussions remotely. And both have worked really well during the past few months. Our background as an endpoint assessment and awarding organisation in the protective services sector means that we've got a great deal of experience in assessment, quality assurance, and working within a regulatory environment. All EPAs go through a robust internal quality assurance process, and everything we do is externally quality assured by an outside independent body. And to date, we've had 4 external quality assurance inspections for our EPA service and have been graded outstanding and good with outstanding aspects for all 4, with Operational Firefighter being no exception. So on the screen now, you can see some quotes from our EQA report for Operational Firefighter, demonstrating both our partnership working and the high quality of our independent assessors. And I'll give you just a few seconds to read the quotes. So that's a brief summary of our delivery so far for Operational Firefighter. And I'm now going to hand over to Steve, who's going to give you an outline of the key changes in each component method. Do put any questions you've got in the chat function. Alternatively, you can contact us directly. So over to you, Steve.
Thanks, Kit. Thanks for that start. It's good to see some familiar names with us today. I hope you're all well and keeping safe, so you're very welcome. Now, before I begin, what I'm going to do is go through, or what I'm going to go through actually applies to not only local authority fire and rescue services, but to private works firefighters, as well, of course, to our armed forces. So the context of community is in relation to where the firefighter is employed, but I'm sure you all understand that anyway. And when fire rescue services are considering the Apprenticeship Award for their on-call colleagues, this can be done, and is certainly worthy of further discussion. Do not think that on-call cannot benefit from the Apprentice Award, because they can. Similarly, if you have on-call colleagues wanting to make the transition to the whole-time duty system and offer the opportunity of the Apprentice Award for parity, fairness, that kind of thing, then again, this can be done and is certainly worthy of further discussion. And just a reminder from me before I get into the detail, if you do have any questions, please put them into the Q&A feed, or any discussion points, they can go into the chat feed. And in addition, as has already been said, if you do have any comments, observations, etc., then please do contact SFJ Awards afterwards. Okay, the portfolio. So the assessment plan from the Institute states that the apprentice must compile and submit a portfolio of evidence, which underpins the professional discussion, of course. Now, this is one of the 3 requirements or conditions for the apprentice to progress through Gateway. And so it's something to monitor through your own internal quality assurance processes. Without a complete portfolio, the apprentice should not be going through Gateway. And I'll let you think about that for a moment. So for version 1.2, the portfolio is only required to contain evidence for the professional discussion only. So that's the 14 KSBs, that's knowledge, skills and behaviours, which are assessed in the professional discussion. There is no need for evidence of basic training, 3 reviews, 1 appraisal, like the annual appraisal, or indeed the 6 training observations, like there was in version 1. In terms of the type of evidence, well, there's not an exhaustive list, but I think it's this how sad I am. I think it's on page 7 of the institute's plan. It says that reflective accounts and self-assessment should not be included, but you can include things like direct observations from line managers should you wish to do so. Now, the evidence must be mapped against the 14 KSBs. So let me give you an example of an identified good practice. And I think the best one to use is community engagement. So Evidence which relates to community engagement should ideally be saved with those words in the naming convention or in the title. So for example, community engagements.doc, if it was a Word document. Now, why do I say this? Well, almost 15 months of experience has shown us that by doing this, the apprentice can start to take ownership of their professional discussion whilst building their evidence. It also helps the apprentice to identify which evidence they wish to replace whilst improving, because of course, while they're going through the 18 months, 2-year journey, they will have better evidence, and they certainly have the right to replace it and improve what they provide to SFJ Awards. Now, this also benefits the assessor as well, because when people like myself are trying to prepare for the professional discussion, it's great if we can easily find the evidence available. So it's good for assessors as well, but I would say that, wouldn't I? So the assessment plan, it states that typically 15 pieces of evidence are required. However, it's about quality, not quantity. So the amount of evidence is simply down to the apprentice or the employer or the training provider. All we're after as assessors is the evidence that allows the apprentice to show off, nothing more. Now, the evidence can be used more than once, of course. So for example, let's use community engagement again. Looking at the assessment plan and when available, the customer guides, you'll very quickly realize that activity relating to community engagement can cover at least 4 of the KSBs. So it's simply about working smarter, not harder. And remember, the portfolio isn't marked or graded, but it does underpin the professional discussion. And so this is how the apprentice can influence their professional discussion with their evidence. But I'll get off my soapbox on that one. So the knowledge test. It now has 30 multiple choice questions. It lasts for 60 minutes. The pass rate is now 60%, not 65. So in numbers, that means 18 out of 30. And the distinction is still 80%. But with the questions being lowered, that just means they need to get 24 out of 30 for version 1.2. So as the slide suggests, thermodynamics, operation of ICT equipment, and PPE type questions, they've gone. And in comes GESIP as a standalone subject area. Where possible, the questions are based around national occupational standards or the national operational guidance. However, the key thing to remember here, and this has been the concern for some services over the past few months, is that your organisation's teaching, policies, procedures for basic on-programme training are most probably on point as relevant study material. Well, how can that be, you may think? Well, they're probably based around the NOG and the National Occupational Standards anyway, so they're ideal. There are 7 assessment criteria or knowledge areas. So there's 4 questions from each, plus 2 randomly selected. The SFJ Awards have a product development team, and they analyse and review the questions regularly. Now, the multiple choice questions are based from level 1 to level 3, meaning they test things like knowledge, understanding, analysis, and application. Now, some of you may recognise those phrases from Bloom's taxonomy, but don't worry if you don't. I didn't in the early days. The practical assessment. Now, this is still a full, long, tiring, and dare I say it, enjoyable day. And it's based on 3 specific areas, namely to carry out search and rescue of casualties within a structure using firefighting media, extrication of casualty or casualties from a situation of entrapment, and finally to deal with a small spillage of hazardous material using a hierarchy of control measures, and then to perform initial dry decontamination. They are the 3 specific areas. So there are 14 KSBs which are holistically assessed, and that means that they're assessed throughout the whole day across all 3 areas. The ratio of assessors to apprentices has changed. That's now dropped from 1 to 5 to 1 to 4. And at least 7 days before the practical assessment takes place, the apprentice must receive information on the assessment format, including timescales. Now, this sort of information is a type of detail that's captured in the guides. But again, in addition to the information in the guides, SFJ Awards will be supplying that information to the apprentice because the Institute have asked for that to happen. So we will do that. Now, also on the slide there, it talks about facilitators, and they need to be independent. But you might be thinking, well, how independent? Well, facilitators who act as incident commanders need to be, and I'll quote the Institute's plan here, need to be unknown to the apprentice. Now, regulated experience at SFJ Awards tells us that this provides 2 options. Either SFJ Awards can provide a facilitator, or the employer can provide a facilitator who has not been involved in the apprentice's learning whatsoever throughout their career to date. They obviously do, however, need to be sector competent. And as the slide says, the practical assessment now includes 6 questions. That's 2 questions per task per apprentice. Now, when we ask the questions, we won't be asking the apprentices to stand side by side and firing questions at them. We'll actually take them away to one side. We'll ask the question, listen to the response out of earshot and sight of the other apprentices. So the apprentices are now assessed in casualty care, and that's the basics. And by that, I mean it's to identify an issue and take appropriate action to promote recovery. And they'll be assessed in commitment to excellence. Now, some of you may be thinking, what does that mean? So in plain English, as an assessor, I would be looking for an apprentice to demonstrate behaviours such as being calm, confident, conscientious, and proactive, perhaps. And for example, that could be seeing an issue and dealing with it and putting it right. They are no longer assessed in collaborative working, operationally that is, so they're not assessed in collaborative working on the incident ground. Situation awareness, that's now in the professional discussion, and working safely around open water, again, that's also moved to the professional discussion. But what I will do now, if Kit allows me, is I'll take this opportunity to explain that the scenarios and tasks, as they are now known, have been designed to be accessible to all fire and rescue services. In order to address the localisms across the sector, whether you're local authority, private or armed forces, liaison and dialogue are key, and SFJ Awards have been recognised as outstanding in this area as well. In fact, before any EPA components commence, we strongly encourage dialogue, meetings, site visits, etc. if you're able to do so. After all, it's good to talk. And I can see there's people here on the webinar today who've benefited from such contact and dialogue. And if you wish to, please share your comments, your observations about that. Not only what went well for you, but also, is there anything that we could have done better? Because we do believe in continuous improvement for the apprentice, because that's why we're meeting here today. They are the key focus. So why do we encourage this? It's where local practices are identified and the tasks for the apprentices and they are influenced. Why? Well, the focus has to be on the apprentice. So it's going to be unfair, indeed unethical, arguably, to assess someone in an unfamiliar practice. And I'm sure you'd agree that the apprentice needs to understand exactly what's being asked of them. So we'll now move on to the professional discussion. And I'm told everywhere that I've worked that this is the area that apprentices fear the most. Yet this is the area, ironically, that they have most control, because they supply the evidence that the assessor, like me, uses in their professional discussion. So please recognise this. Yes, I'm going to get on my soapbox again, and encourage your apprentices to take ownership of this component as soon as evidence gathering commences, and use the guides. But that's a totally separate soapbox. Why do I say this, and why am I harping on about the guides and taking ownership? Well, experience tells me that the guides and recognising ownership of the professional discussion reduces anxiety, nerves, and it actually empowers the apprentice to tell the assessor, and there's one or two taking part today as well, it tells us what they've done, how they've done it, how it's made them feel, the impact and consequences of their actions. And I can tell you some really interesting stories out there, but equally there are some amazing apprentices with a lot to offer, even at this early stage in their career. Now, earlier I spoke about the portfolio. It's the portfolio which underpins the professional discussion. Now, the questions or topics of discussion are based around the 14 KSBs to ensure consistency and fairness. However, we do get diversity because that's introduced by the provision of individual evidence together with individual responses. And that's where you get your differences. It's a conversation, it's a chat almost, and it lasts about an hour. All 14 KSBs are covered as the assessor asks a minimum of 12 questions. And to be specific, the following areas have been introduced. So the use of maintenance and operational equipment, that's brand new. Water safety has come across from the practical assessment. Understanding construction, that's a brand new topic to the EPA. Situation awareness, that now includes health and safety. That's come across from the practical assessment. And collaborative working, not operational, that's now been introduced. But the collaborative working there is a focus on community engagement. So I'll stress that collaborative working is focused on community engagement. Now, I've just talked about what's been introduced. What's been removed is risk assessment and dynamic risk assessment, because as I've said, this is covered in situational awareness. Casualty care is now in the practical assessment, so that's no longer in the discussion. Neither is GESIP or environmental protection or problem solving. Resolving operational incidents, again, that's gone because there was duplication. So that is now absorbed into situational awareness and the control of fires. So to recap, I've gone through the headlines, the key changes to the 3 components of the EPA. I've also explained the purpose and the importance of the portfolio, as well as the benefits to opening up dialogue, communication, site visits, etc., prior to the endpoint assessment. So, thank you for listening, for sending through questions, observations, and we're now going to do a quick poll. And the simple question should be on your screens now.
Okay, I think the answers are coming in now for the poll. That's great. Okay. Well, okay, so it's 54% of you who are on the webinar today have had apprentices go through endpoint assessment, and 46 haven't as yet. So you've got, we got quite a few to go, and that's great. Thank you for doing that. In line with that, back to the number at the start, 1,566, top marks to all of you. The number represents the number of apprentices that have been registered onto the operational firefighter standard. So these apprentices could be at any stage in their journey. They could be starting out right at the beginning and just registered, or they could be midway through their training, or they could have completed. So I think you'd all agree that's a really good number of apprentices to have on this standard, and it is growing every day, which is really good news. So we're now on to what our offer is and what making the move actually means. So for the remaining section of the webinar, I'm going to provide an outline of our support offer to you and your apprentices for version 1.2. But just a few points on making the transition to the new standard and what that means. So the funding band has increased, which is really good news. So the funding has increased from 12,000 to 14,000, which is actually really unusual in apprenticeship standards. They often go down. So that's very good news. Then a good recognition of what's involved in this apprenticeship. Apprentices who are on version 1 of the standard can convert to version 1.2 while they're on program, and there is no formal cutoff time for making the move. However, you do need to consider the following. Timing. So how far along are your apprentices and your training staff with the journey? If the apprentices are at the point where they're getting ready for Gateway and already engaged in EPA prep, it wouldn't be sensible to change. However, if you've got, say, 5 to 6 months to go, you've got your on-program training materials adapted and in place, and you've also got everyone involved in the apprentice's learning journey up to speed, then you can go for it. Communication. So we're already having discussions with many of you about making the move, and it's really important that we have those discussions with you as soon as possible so that we can ensure that scheduling and site visits are planned and mapped to version 1.2. Now, we can be flexible with this. So, for example, if you've got apprentices who have already got a lot of portfolio evidence together and it's mapped to version 1, we can make sure, we can work with you to make sure the key components are mapped across to version 1.2 and it doesn't have to all be redone. And lastly, funding. So as we mentioned earlier, the funding band for version 1.2 has increased, and this will apply to all new apprentices enrolled on this version. However, and this is a bit of a news flash from yesterday, the initial information given to the Trailblazer group from the Institute for Apprenticeships was that apprentices could switch to the higher funding band during their apprenticeship. Unfortunately, that information is incorrect. We carried out a double check directly with the ESFA, who confirmed yesterday that the funding cannot be enhanced for any apprentices swapping from version 1 to 1.2. However, apprentices can still move to the new assessment plan, but you can only access the funding for new apprentices enrolled on that assessment plan. And for your new apprentices, we've got 2 pricing options for endpoint assessment, which we will share with you in due course. But please remember that we're here to support you. So any questions, big or small, please get in touch with us to discuss your individual organisation's needs. So I know it's lunchtime, although my lunches aren't quite like this at all, more like a bag of crisps and an apple. And you might say, why has Kit put up a picture of a high quality picnic basket or a luxury hamper? Well, we like to think of our EPA service offer at SFJ Awards like a high quality picnic basket. So because we really believe in working in partnership with you, our customers, we think you pop things in the basket and so do we. And the result is we've got a lovely luxury hamper filled with everything that apprentices need for EPA. So just briefly, here's a guide of what we provide for you. So we provide guides, comprehensive guides, including a customer guide and an apprentice guide. And the guides give full details on the assessments, how we approach them, and they're supported by a host of document templates to support the on-program training team with EPA prep. Our materials for version 1.2 are planned to be ready by the end of this month. And of course, we will let you have access to those as soon as they are ready. Tests. So we've got mock knowledge tests with answers, and they will be available in paper version or online. And they're a really good way to get apprentices used to answering the multi-choice test in a timed assessment environment as practice for EPA. We also provide sample practical scenarios. In version 1.2, remember, these are called tasks, and these will support you to run practice assessments before the day. Support. So part of our package is ongoing guidance from our EPA team, and that includes support sessions and site visits carried out by our lead independent assessors. The virtual sessions we can offer to you and your teams are unlimited, although we can't do them every day, of course, but we're always contactable to answer any queries. But for version 1.2, we're also going to be offering a virtual session for your apprentices, so we can talk through what they can expect on the day of the practical assessment and the professional discussion. Of course, we're independent, so certain boundaries will apply, and we won't necessarily be able to answer all their questions, but we're hoping that by seeing us, seeing that we're a friendly and approachable bunch will help to reduce any nerves. So that is on offer now for version 1.2. E-portal. So we're moving to a specialist e-portal for endpoint assessment, and some of you have made that move with us already. And we're offering free access to the system for all of our customers. The system enables you to clearly track your apprentice's journey right from registration through to certification. And you'll be able to book your EPAs through the portal and submit all documentation, including gateway evidence and portfolio evidence, easily. Flexible delivery. So flexibility, we believe, is the key to successful delivery, particularly in these times. So that's why we like to engage with you as soon as possible into the apprenticeship journey, so we can understand your requirements and ensure that there are no surprises on the day. As I mentioned earlier, we can offer the knowledge test as with via an online platform and conduct professional discussions remotely, and that's particularly useful during the pandemic. We'll work with you to schedule the EPAs to ensure that we maximise momentum and take apprentices off the run for as fewer days as possible. So we can do that with version 1.2 because the assessment components can be done in any order. So we can deliver the entire endpoint assessment over 2 days if that suits your organisation. And lastly, experience. So we're an experienced endpoint assessment organisation, having grown out of an awarding organisation specialising in this sector. We've carried out a great deal of EPAs in many different areas of the protective services sector, and we're supported by a team of highly experienced, qualified and trained independent assessors. So that's our offer. That's what's in our luxury hamper. And that's the end of the formal part. We're now going to answer some questions that have come into the Q&A feed. There've been quite a lot of questions coming in. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will be producing a frequently asked questions document, which will be sent and shared with you after the webinar. And we, of course, can contact you independently as well. So I'm just going to have a look over at the questions, and Steve and I are going to share these out between us. So let's have a look. So first of all, okay, I think this is one for you, Steve. Might give them all to Steve, you never know. Each fire and rescue service does things slightly differently. So how will we know what fire and rescue services do and what they don't do?
Okay, I think we both touched on this, but to expand a little bit more, it's about the contact, it's about the communication, it's about starting dialogue. as we've already done and have experience with this, the sooner we start to talk and ask questions to identify those isms, because there's not only, I think in the local authority, there are 45 fire rescue services, and then you've got your private fire services, as like I've said, as well as your armed forces. So the sooner we talk, we can quickly find out how you pitch a ladder, how you or what phrases you use to make sure your firefighters are safe in compartment fire behaviour training, for an example, because it's unfair to expect the apprentices to do something or carry out a task or understand terminology that they're not familiar with. And I tried to allude to that, but it's a good question that's coming, because it does need to be confirmed. And of course, this is where we find out about your resources. Are the resources appropriate? Are they fit for purpose? It can be a site assessment as well, so we can discuss and agree where the endpoint assessment can take place. And that's not just the training yard, but also the facilities for the professional discussions. Kit's already mentioned that we can do these remotely as well as on site. But certainly in the current climate, if we are to do them on site, then we would prefer certainly I would, but we prefer the rooms to be, to have windows, to have good ventilation. And again, through dialogue with the employers and the training providers, it's working very, very well. And there's some professional employers and training providers out there who are very cognizant of this and very mindful of providing a very safe workplace. So I'm grateful for that. Thank you. But yeah, the reason is to make sure that the apprentice gets a good crack at the whip. I think the other thing to mention here, Kit, would be facilitators. Would that be right?
Yes, I was about to go on to that, because we've had a few questions about facilitators. And of course, one of the big changes with this standard is that facilitators have to be unknown to the apprentice, as Steve mentioned earlier. So there are options for that. So we can provide facilitators. So we can discuss that with you, and in our pricing options we have a price for us to provide a facilitator. So if we provide a facilitator, some of the questions coming through are about how will our facilitators know what happens in individual fire and rescue services. Well, obviously part of our planning, as we've talked about today, is site visits, is that constant communication and dialogue. So we will make sure that our facilitators are fully aware of how your organisation works and any localisms, and way before the day, so that they will understand. We'll ask the questions. So if we bring facilitators, we'll make sure that they understand your ways of working. On the other hand, if you can provide facilitators that are unknown to the apprentice, so they can't have been involved in any of their training, they can't have been managing them, we will make sure that your facilitators are fully trained and actually understand what the role of the facilitator is, as we do now, actually, to be honest, with version 1, don't we, Steve?
We do. Yes, we do. Yeah, sorry, I was just reading some of the Q&A there.
Yes.
Yeah, and because the facilitators need to be comfortable in supporting, because facilitators and assessors work hand in glove to enable the process to take place for the apprentice. Again, the key here is the apprentice. So the facilitators do need to be comfortable doing what they're doing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's all part of
and we'll have those conversations with you, so we're all clear. If you do provide a facilitator, we will be asking your facilitator to sign a declaration to confirm that they are unknown to the apprentice. Okay. So we've had quite a few things come on about the portfolio, Steve, and this is going to be one for you because you have looked at lots of portfolios, I know. So
Right.
Who looks at the portfolio?
Who looks at the portfolio?
Yeah.
Right. Okay. I will use my experience in the sector to answer this, as well as my experience as an assessor. And I'll start at the beginning. So who looks at the portfolio? The apprentice and their line managers. So if you're not on rank to roll, it'll be your leading firefighter, sub-officers and station officers. But if you're still on rank to roll, it'll be the crew managers, watch managers, and the apprentice who looks at the portfolio at the very beginning. The station manager or whoever who does the internal quality assurance work will look at it monthly or quarterly, I'm sure, because it needs to be cross-mapped to the KSBs, the professional discussion, remember. And at the beginning, I started off not with a negative, but a bit of a warning. If it's not correct, if the portfolio is not correct and not mapped against the 14 KSBs, that means it shouldn't be going through Gateway. So coming through this apprenticeship journey, at the end of it, who's looking at the portfolio? Well, it's yourselves before you submit the portfolio and the apprentice through Gateway to make sure it's compliant with the requirements of the assessment plan. But then people like me look at the portfolio. And so the assessors look at it. We look at the evidence that's cross-mapped against the KSBs, hopefully. And what we do is use the evidence in the portfolio to shape the questions from the KSBs for the professional discussion. And like I've said, the KSBs are within the guides, they're within the assessment plan, so everybody knows what they are. However, the evidence is where you get your differences. And by looking at the portfolios as an assessor, we see diversity through every endpoint assessment professional discussion we have. And the way that the individual delivers it is different. And the way the individual responds to questions around their evidence is different. So in terms of who looks at the portfolio, working backwards now, it's me as an assessor, and then working right the way to the front, it's the apprentice, their line managers, and whoever's involved with the IQA process. That was a long answer.
No, but I think also it's portfolios. When apprenticeship standards first came out, there were portfolios, and with the first version of this standard, it's a little bit woolly about what should be in the portfolio, and there is a tendency to just chuck everything in. The more we put in, the better. And I think with version 1.2, there's much more guidance about, I mean, I know that they give an amount, typically 15 pieces of evidence or 14 pieces of evidence, but it's about the quality of it. And it really makes it clear in version 1.2, the portfolio is to inform the professional discussion. That's what it's there for. It's not an MVQ portfolio. We don't need to see all sorts of other stuff. We did have a question, Steve, an add-on question about the portfolio, about reflective accounts, because it's very clear in version 1.2 that reflective accounts should not be used.
Yeah, they're not to be used now in version 1.2. You're quite right. However, what can be used, and when we say reflective accounts, that's self-assessment as well. So they're no longer allowed to be included. However, if there's any direct observations from line managers, then by all means they can be included. And I don't know it inside out. It's a reference document, but I do know that it's page 7 that gives you the non-exhaustive list. So if people are making a note, it's page 7 of the assessment plan from the Institute that gives you the requirements of the portfolio, what goes in and what doesn't go in.
I think you do know it inside out, actually.
Yeah.
So, okay, so there've been some questions about this, a webinar like this for the apprentice audience. Yes, we can do that. As I said, this webinar will be recorded and you will have access to this, so you can look at it with your colleagues at leisure. And as I said, Steve and I we'll be producing some other more targeted ones on the portfolio, on the professional discussion, on the practical assessment, as well as working with you as well. So by the time your apprentices come to do their endpoint assessment in version 1.2, you will all be fully confident and up to speed with it. So this is just an outline of the changes. We will be going into much more detail, and we will be producing something like this for apprentices, so that they can, see how it works. So yes, we do. We've had a few. I think we've got time for maybe one more question, and as I said, we will answer your questions. So please don't, if you've put a question up and it hasn't been answered, we will come back to them, but we can't go. So we've been asked about what the failure rate is for operational firefighters so far. Now, obviously, we don't have that information across the board. There are endpoint assessments carried out by other organisations, so we don't have the overall information. That isn't published anywhere. What I can say is that the pass rate is, rather than the failure rate, the pass rate is around about 78% at the moment. Now, it's quite hard with an apprenticeship that has 3 methods of assessment at the end. It's quite tough to pass all of those. And some people say, oh, we want all our apprentices to get distinctions, which of course everyone always should be aiming for a distinction, but it is hard to get a distinction across 3 separate component methods as well. So, that's to be expected. Quite a number of other standards at this level only have 2 assessment methods. This has 3, so it's great. It's belt and braces stuff, but it's challenging. It's not as easy. You need to pass all 3. So, but we don't have the figure overall. I'm sure at some time that number will be published. So we probably haven't got time for any more questions at the moment. I'm just having a quick look. Oh, just we've got a quick question here. Do you class a learner statement as a reflective account? I think that would be.
It is, yes.
Yeah,
it's a self-assessment, is it?
It's a self-assessment.
Yes.
But again, you know, if you've got any queries about portfolio evidence and really specifics like that, we'll talk to you about that. So get in touch with us and we can have those open and honest discussions so that we're very clear and we can support you with that. And like I said, if you do move apprentices halfway through and they're on, they've done their portfolio for version 1 and there's a whole bundle of reflective accounts in there, it's just about making sure that those are backed up by evidence from line managers and statements and witness statements about various incidents that match in with those. So please don't just abandon them all. Okay. So thank you for your Q&A and for your chats, and we are nearly out of time now. So we just want to thank you for taking the time to join this webinar today, for your questions and comments over the past 45 minutes. And we just want to say to you, and I know we just keep saying it, really just do get in touch with us if you want to have a more detailed conversation. You know where we are. I hope that we've given you a good insight into version 1.2, and please watch this space. We'll keep you informed about more things that are coming up. And finally, your feedback from on each event that we run is really important to us. So please, can I ask you to fill in the quick survey that will pop up on your screen as you leave the webinar today. So thank you. And I hope if you're going to have your lunch now, maybe you might have something that looks a bit like the picnic basket. I don't know. But thank you very much for attending today from both of us. Thank you.